I raised my children, who took a kindly and on the whole favourable interest in it.
I quite like that. It's the sort of incidental music. The first one was The Ring to the Hobbits, bold opening to fairly cheerful passage. The master ring of evil power, the possessor of which can become invisible at will. The whole show, the dramatisation of Lord of the Rings in 55 has been completely lost, so that's all that survives, but at least it gives you an impression. No one has heard that since 1955.
The story, in essence, is the adventures of this little chap. Then, of course, you move out into the wilder world where the imagination can be let go.
Good that they started by asking that, grounding in the fact that he was a medievalist.
Perhaps the most important is the lecture which I gave at the British Academy, which was entitled Beowulf, The Monsters and the Christians. I also once gave a paper to the Philological Society on which is entitled Chaucer as a Philologist.
In his studies he worked in Old English, which is the Anglo-Saxon period, and Middle English as well, Chaucer, and Old Norse as well.
And last of all, the most recent, I suppose, was my Andrew Land lecture as an essay on fairy story. Those are the three, I think, perhaps the most things in which I've been perhaps most effective, any, on the subject which I profess.
Tutorial.
Can you say one sentence in any foreign language which sounds beautiful to you?
No, I don't. What if I can? No.
Can you list the inhabitants of the world, the inhabitants of Middle Earth?
No, we know nothing about them, hardly.
Could you just list them? So,
what's the point of it?
Well, just to give people an idea of what...
The first day of the interviews, Tolkien just couldn't get this.
This hadn't happened to him before. Pinned to that armchair. You know, having these... Yes, the first thing was he found it difficult to get up at the window, as I asked him just to sort of look out of the window, and there was something in the way, so you hear his voice shouting, I can't get up, there's something in the way. And then he moves whatever it was.
There's damn thing in the way.
I hope it wasn't too heavy. He was 76 years old at the time. And then I think I just kept the camera running while he came down. And he opened that door and came out. And obviously he assumed the camera wasn't working anymore. And that's where he said that, I thought, very touching line about it's a pity they didn't catch on sooner, the book.
It's a pity the book didn't catch on a bit sooner, isn't it?
So we're now back to material which was only in Leslie's rushes. He's saying he enjoyed bad reviews because they often sort of led to better sales.
Whose work had led to the downthrone of Sauron. Also, she passed the great temptation and the ring was actually offered to her by Sauron.
Oh dear.
Can we have that off the hook?
That's Joss Ackland, isn't it?
The great Joss Ackland.
Oh, the great Joss Ackland. I wish I was.
Like food, there's a great joy in food.
Food? Never been a trencher man.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am the verger of Merton College. Welcome to the
Leslie was
college.
particularly struck by the verger of Merton.
I know all about the college.
Our books must remain with us. She said, thank you very much. I said, it is my pleasure.
He was just so extraordinary. His diction was so out of this world in a way that he seemed to belong to Tolkien.
A very unusual colleague.
Now state your name.
Roger Highfield. All the time that Tolkien was at Merton, I was at Merton. But he was professor of English language, and I was a tutor in modern history. Tolkien didn't belong to the English upper class. But he got on very well with ordinary people, such as his scout. His scout was one of his best friends. But the scout, you see, cleaned the room, various things like that. Was a houseman.
Oh, that's the dreadful. That's the candle all togged up. I've never seen him so tidy. Employed to do etymologies, and I ran into quite a lot of them.
So again, this is new. This isn't material we've ever heard about him discussing his work at the Oxford English Dictionary, where he was given the letter W. So he started working on the history of words.
Owing to the kindness of people who found an unfortunate war-returned officer with nothing much to do, I was working as Professor Bradley's assistant on the Oxford Dictionary.
So he's being asked in the material that's just in the transcript how he writes about characters. And he says, I find I often describe timid persons like myself. The only saving grace he thinks they could have is fortitude, which I don't think I possess myself in very great degree. So he's being humble.
What would you have done if you'd been a little boy and a wizard had come and asked you to go to the Misty Mountains and help kill a dragon?
I've been very well brought up. To avoid conversation with dubious old gentlemen, I should have retired into the house and asked my mother. But the vast number, as I can judge from my very considerable fan mail, I should say there's not very many who really read the books with any attention.
3, take 1.
Coming back to what?
Coming back from the war.
Oh, yes. I was invalided the latter part of my time in the war. And I think the last things I can remember...
Tolkien, of course, went over the top with the Lancashire Fusiliers.
I was swept away, partly by an inner weakness that says yes, but mostly with a feeling of no, into becoming a party of people who are going on expedition, exploring expedition.
He's responding here to what's the Hobbit about? So the question is whether there's anything on those 4 that I haven't seen. That's really what we're trying to pick up.
Mountain tradition about ancient Swedish history. It's really rather a document of Swedish history in English. It happens to be entirely English in its literary and...
So that's new footage. That I've never heard of that. I've never heard him say this about Beowulf.
Oh, really?
And I've looked at the offcuts because in the offcuts that Leslie holds, he says, it immediately cuts to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. He's now telling us about Beowulf, which is fantastic. Yeah. So somehow we're piecing this all together. It's like bits of a jigsaw, but they're in 3 different boxes.
Any extra information we get of Tolkien's own mouth is going to be very important. What he says about languages, for example, I found fascinating because, the Elvish languages are supposed to be beautiful and flowing and light, while the language of Mordor is all dark and guttural and sounds ugly.
It's hideous language, meant to be hideous. Do you want that as a
contrast? Give a very good idea of the strangeness of one language.
It was lovely to get the declension of Kyria from Tolkien's mouth as well.
Motion thing, Kyrianna, to a ship, Kyriassi, in, by, or on a ship, Kyriallo, from a ship. The plural is Kyria, Kyriarion, the genitive.
Sometimes we just guess at how these invented languages are pronounced, and it's lovely to have another example of a whole noun, it's kind of conjugated all the way through. So that's a great addition to our understanding of these languages as well.
Kyrias, Kyriassin, Kyriannar, Kyriallor. The instrumental is Kyrianen in the singular and Kyriainen in the plural. That's enough to go on this other.
George, is that knocking?
Yes, can we just cut?
Sorry, could we?
10, take 1.
First of all, it has been said that there's no religion in your books, there's no God.
In the question about religion, again, there's a little snippet there that I think is really important. The fact that, there are no overt religious practices in Middle-earth, and then he says, but there are some hints here and there, like that conversation between Gandalf and Frodo about how the ring comes to him.
One place, or by implication, as in the conversation about between Gandalf and Frodo, and what it was directing the finding of the ring.
There's been a long discussion in scholarship about providence in Middle-earth, about how certain things, they don't happen. There is no fate or destiny, but somehow things are there is some sort of divine plan for things to go a certain way. And he seems to confirm that here, that there is, certain things converged so that Frodo is the ring bearer and the mission is going to go towards a particular direction.
You must have, I think, in this kind of narrative, something which has the same emotive and situation as the gods, Olympic gods, and other gods in the.
I'm Greek originally, and I grew up with classical myths and gods of Olympus, etc. And when I went to university and studied English, it made a huge impression upon me that one man can create an extended mythology that is as complex and as multi-layered as something that a culture has created.
Design, but which he's had the existence of our first created minds and spirits, the demiurgic, angelic spirits, where they appear as the Valar or powers. They're not gods.
When he talks about the Valar, he says that they're not gods, they are created, they're angelic powers, but they have the position that gods have in other mythologies. So his own religious sensibility is still there. You can't have many gods, you'll still have a monotheistic system, but they have to fit with the idea of what a mythology is and how it works. He has talked about that in letters, but the fact that he's bringing it in this context, with all the technical terms, involved, it just shows how strongly he's engaged with all of this.
But if you want a brief definition of the mythological world, it consists of the.
Sorry, we do want to catch this, so we better wait till they reload.
Oh, good.
8, take 1.
It depends on what you mean by factory. I mean, a factory may be very big or a very large, a very small thing.
That's interesting. I've never heard that. So, study after study is written of Tolkien, how he hated industry. When the hobbits go back to the Shire, there's factories in there, etc. This is his big comment on 20th century industrialisation. And now he's just been asked, you dislike industry, and he says, well, I've no objection to that.
Motor cars.
Love them, love writing them, like driving them.
So again, you'll find study after study where people say, oh, Tolkien hated motor cars. And she said, no, I love them and I love driving them.
There are those moments where I wish, more people could see there is all of this idea out there that Tolkien was anti-industry and very much for going back in some golden past where, it's only nature and nothing man-made.
It's too many of them, yes, quite. But the evil of all things it must be judged apart from the multiplication table, because the multiplication table makes evil out of practically everything.
1.
What moved me most, I think the most tragic point in the whole story is how good, the terrible irony that good often does evil. The most tragic moment is when Sam in his protectiveness just take your hands off and therefore defeats golems of repentance. Because that seems to be very true to life.
3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring...
I asked him about power, and he said, well, actually, power is power. It's neither good nor bad.
Yeah. And I think at that point he says, I wouldn't like to have met Sauron after the ring is destroyed, which is a little aside, but it means, right, so Sauron does survive after the ring is destroyed, but he says there's not much left of him because he'd invested all his power in this one artifact which gets destroyed. But it does imply...
Oh, interesting, yes. It takes a Tolkien expert to...
I was just picking up on these asides and I'll write an article on that. That's great.
We just walked out around the Merton Fellows Garden and we looked at trees.
It was much more woody, and there was a long line of trees, this guy not any younger, all along the wall, so those houses couldn't see you and you couldn't see them when they were in leaf. Yes. It was a much more secluded garden.
I love that little self-deprecating laugh he does when he says, in some ways, I'd really quite like to have been a tree and to have felt what they feel.
I suppose I have actually in some
now that tiny spark, that's the elemental detail.
I should have liked to be able to make contact with the tree and find out what it feels about things.